Hello, everyone. Welcome again to this week's London Speaker Bureau webinar. We hope you're all safe and well, and thank you for taking the time to join. Today, we're delighted to hear from Shivvy Jervis on a range of subjects, and we've also made some time for some Q&As towards the end of the webinar. In today's webinar, Shivvy will be helping to make sense of this new reality that we're all getting to terms with and give us some striking insights to think about. She is a four-time award-winning expert on social innovation and an acclaimed futurist. Named one of Britain's business role models of 2020, she recently spoke for the United Nations and has previously hosted documentaries for the Discovery Channel. Currently, she is advising the Office of the Mayor of London to envision the future for our cities, whilst also authoring her first book. Today, she will be speaking with London Speaker Bureau's very own Maria Franzoni. As always, please feel free to use the Q&A option, which you can access at the bottom of the screen, to send questions to our panelists. And with that, I will pass over to Maria and Shivvy.
Hello, thank you very much for joining us. Shivvy, it's lovely to see you. So listen, fantastic. I'm going to dive straight in because I want to take as much value from our time together as I can. So you talk about the role of the fourth industrial revolution. Can you help us connect that to today's theme of Humanity 5.0?
Sure, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in to listen to this dynamic webcast and what promises to be a great dialogue with Maria and myself. Maria, at this moment in time, we're faced with our own mortality, right? Which is worrying enough, but we're also now having to maintain the health of our livelihoods and businesses. It's an intense change cycle, and we're having to reframe, become more resilient, and then start to think about recovery timelines. And one thing I want to say upfront early on is in the next 6 to 9 months alone, I see organizations of all sizes needing to try and achieve the sort of acceleration when it comes to digital innovation that actually would have previously been on an 18-month or 2-year timeline. I mean, that's quite intense. And as you rightly said, my focus has heavily been on those advances coming from the fourth industrial revolution, what we call Industry 4.0, and we're halfway through that. But I've always heavily advocated in that digital engineering must be people-centered at its core, or we'll go fast, sure, but will we really be going where we need to? Will it be inclusive, sustainable growth? So when the pandemic struck earlier this year, I found that I was getting a surge of requests from leaders in different organizations for some sort of a toolkit or construct in order to use innovation to preserve and boost our own human capacity or human potential whilst working with digital tools. And indeed, one conversation with a business leader really jumped out for me, Maria. He said, Shivvy, we're not a digital company. I can't compete with the big tech giants. And this is a medium-sized company, by the way. I don't even have a CTO. Where am I going to start? And so it struck me that if I could investigate and share the most useful tools and advances that could perhaps be part of a set of unifying solutions for the challenges that are confronting us, and then develop that into a set of themes called Humanity 5.0, that would be of help. Because what we mean by 5.0 is the next evolution of ourselves, our business, our work, society, because this must be a people-driven recovery. And for today, I've picked out 4 themes out of the 7, starting with hybrid work reality, then talking about adaptive styles of leadership, then moving on to particular strands of tech that can help, and lastly, debunking some of the dangerous stereotypes and myths that we see about digital innovation.
Fantastic, and thank you for choosing 4 and sharing 4 with us. I'm going to start with the first one that you mentioned, which is the future of work. And actually, we've seen so many changes in the way we're working now. What are you thinking we should be considering? What are the considerations and factors going forward?
So Maria, I used to focus so heavily on estimates about the global talent shortage that we're expecting by the end of this year. And now I'm rethinking that whole thing. We had the luxury of being able to say, we have 1.4 million digital jobs in the UK that need filled this year. We only have 400,000 skilled people. So actually we have a shortage. And of course, now we're talking about significant potential unemployment and workforce who sadly don't have the luxury of potentially even staying in work, they're displaced. So I think one consideration all organizations need to take into account is that there is going to be this vast group of people who've been displaced. And they may not be your direct workforce employees, but they are A, part of wider society, and B, they're your existing and future customers. And many of them are frightened, uncertain. So part of this future of work conversation isn't just about the shiny gadgets that we could use or the physical layout of offices and distancing. It's also about thinking ways to nourish and support the wider workforce. Financial institutions, for example, thinking about giving us a break from overdraft fees or rent holidays, vouchers, credits for e-learning, various mechanisms, I think, that can help the person that will be, in fact, your future customer when we come out of this.
And actually, one of the other things you talk about in relation to the future of work is immersive reality. And I'm not sure I totally understand that. So I'm going to ask you to explain what that is and what tools we can use as part of that. And also what you think that the role will be of this in the future of work and in the future of learning.
Yes, absolutely. And interestingly, the work I'm doing with the Mayor of London's office, we just had a call yesterday, and we've now almost adapted it to be wholly on the future of learning. And, there's neuroscience research that shows, Maria, we learn up to 4 times more using immersive forms of teaching in a corporate environment, not just personally. And so what we mean, let me just qualify what I mean by even mixed reality or immersive reality. So you've got a couple of components there. One is something that a lot of us don't have at home. Most of us don't have a virtual reality headset, right? But one aspect of it is some sort of a headset, much more lightweight than what we saw before, far cheaper than we had even 2 years ago. So for example, the Microsoft HoloLens device is being used by a variety of organizations that I advise. But that's VR, let's say. But then you've got augmented reality, where simply by holding up your own phone or your tablet and using the camera function on there, you essentially hold it over your current environment and it overlays a digital object onto that. So you're able to see something overlaid onto your real life environment. A great way to learn. Makes it very vivid, makes it very real. And I think where this can be used is reskilling. Because in and amongst this COVID-related shift we're facing, many companies need to actually enable their people to learn to work with digital tools. And one way of training and learning and adapting is mixed reality, either a HoloLens headset or an AR app, which is on your phone, or both. And what this can allow us to do, even more crucially than even the teaching, is actually have teams that are in completely different geographies, which is of course what's happening more now, allow them to essentially see the same environment, same product lines, and have a sort of multi-networking structure. So you could have an engineer in Sweden talking to an expert in India and then someone in London, but they're all actually viewing, perhaps, for example, the same model of a ship or a particular building. And they can actually toggle that, manipulate those objects in real time, make iterations as they go along. So product development, product testing, this is being used quite widely now. And we're seeing, consumer brands like Nike and Adidas use this to even, in a more creative way, design their next product. But I think if we essentially need to give people a base level of fluency with digital tools, using immersive reality could allow less social upheaval. And those people that were going to be displaced by, for example, automation anyway, and McKinsey shows that, by 2025, we were going to see almost a third of people anyway displaced. How can we somehow mitigate that? And I think using clever tools like this that really don't cost the earth, are very simple to use, and every organization needs to have, say, 10 of them, I think it could make a massive difference.
It's so positive and you're so passionate about it. Thank you for that. It's great. Good to have some positivity at the moment. So people know about the Internet of Things. We've heard about this. You talk about the Internet of Everything and you see sort of other technologies evolving out of this. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. So firstly, Maria, the Internet of Things itself, IoT, it's a term bandied about so often. But when I really sit down with folks that, I speak to at events, a lot of them, do ask quietly, listen, I don't want to ask this in front of everyone, but can you just demystify what this even means? And I completely understand that. It is quite a baffling area. What we basically mean by the Internet of Things is items, devices, sensors connected to the internet, right from your phone, which is the most obvious living, breathing, fully connected device, to your fridge, to inanimate objects that you essentially allow them to connect through sensors to the internet. But it also has something called the Internet of Bodies. So for example, we're now seeing a digital pill being developed where you'd swallow a very safe pill and it essentially talks to the internet. It swims into your body and it's allowed to essentially tap all the biosensors, be able to tell you about, for example, your risk of heart disease. It's able to go places that a probe might not, and to be able to throw up amazing insights about your body, preempt disease. It's being used for patients who have epilepsy and things like that. But I digress. Now where we're going to is the internet of everything. It's people, bodies, things, sensors. Traffic lights are talking to cars and syncing braking and acceleration. And so we're seeing some really social good elements come from this. So where this is ideal now in this pandemic summer is where now physical distancing is feeling like it'll be the norm for a while. It's really going to help organizations beyond those in engineering or, for example, other industries that are more industrial to devise safety strategies, improve collaboration, manage inventory, optimize procurement. And because these can all be done remotely, you could have someone essentially look at a factory floor, walk the factory floor without needing to be there, or monitor equipment from another continent. And then, this has even further implications beyond that, which of course we don't have time for today, but, Internet of Things and Internet of Everything, Internet of Skills, where you can now send the sense of touch across the web. That's a different talk and a keynote. I need an hour for that.
my brain might explode. This is just like, wow. So
Yeah.
Your second theme is leadership, and I think it's important. We need to talk about leadership and the new norms. And I know you advise on the adoption of emerging tech. You've told us about that, and blueprints for digital leadership. So can you share some of the wider observations that we should be thinking about in terms of leading in a COVID age, if we can call it that?
Yeah, sure. So I think to everyone listening, I'd like to hazard a guess that you will concur when I say previously we were leading in a digital economy, but now we're leading digitally in a virtual scenario, in a virtual economy, because we're trying to mitigate a lot of the issues that come from physicality. And as a leader, you're having to toggle between on and offline modes, aren't you? So I think some wider observations that I've made, because I'm thankful that I've been privy to some of the strategy models for some very big companies in the last couple of months, going in-house to advise them. And one of the things that's come up is leadership itself has always had a big chunk of it devoted to governance, right? But now I think we're moving into what I'd love to call the moral economy. What are the values driving us? What are the values that govern our organizations? Dare I say it, Maria, our governments, we won't go there. But the pandemic is almost forcing this reassessment of values, and there's more scrutiny now on leaders to display a sense of responsibility, not just to their immediate board or investors, but to the wider workforce, and then open that out to the communities in which they're operating. And we've already got sentiment polls being conducted, one by my own forecasting lab indeed, that reflect that those leaders that are being seen now as making irresponsible and ruthless decisions will see their reputation affected to the point that consumers will turn away from them saying, I'm not going to buy from these guys when this is all over. The other aspect of leadership, that's a kind of second observation, is when a crisis hits, and this applies to our personal lives as well. So if you maybe think about it that way, some of the aspects in play, particularly in an organization that was set in stone, can get unlocked and moving, right? Because now you have the pressure to do this. So the sudden loss of physical supervision, not a bad thing, less silos, more agility, more collaboration, but also the accelerated decision-making. I'm seeing organizations come to me and say, previously we had this set of hierarchy in place and the control vested in very few people, but now those structures are flattening because they've just got to make decisions faster, and you've got less members of the workforce available because they're not able to work, or they're in a vulnerable position. So faster processes and unnecessary red tape. So could we take some of these things forward post-pandemic and embed these benefits that are arising from a very difficult time?
True, you're absolutely right in your synopsis. We have seen all of that. It's incredible, really incredible. And have you seen any specific approaches or thinking that we should be mindful of?
Yes, and interestingly, Maria, one of the aspects I was thinking about when I was trying to work out what I wanted to say today is there's a piece of research that came out, I love my research, that shows 53% of us pre-COVID didn't feel the mental or emotional connection to our teams, our work culture, or our business leaders as it is. And that surged now to something like 70%. And only 2 in 5 organizations believe that the leadership approaches that's being advocated in their organizations are actually even tangibly impacting their own business lines. So there's a real opportunity here. And there are 3 approaches that I think can lead to a more adaptive leadership style, and I'll try and summarize them. The first one is something I actually shared in a masterclass for Ernst & Young last year. And it really seemed to reconcile a lot of issues that they were having. And I call it the inventor mindset. And I'm going to get a little poetic for a second, if I can, Maria. There's a Zen monk and author called Shunryu Suzuki, and I love this quote from him. And he says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. And that really resonates, right? So to flourish through COVID, I think leaders could do well to actually emulate some of the behaviors that we often see from inventors or early stage founders. Taking yourself back to what it was like when you started in your business. You were getting down and dirty in the trenches. You were rolling your sleeves up, getting in the front line to really understand what your employees are dealing with. And I mean this figuratively, obviously not literally at the moment. And then the ability to pivot to what customers want at that point. And I'm seeing more organizations realize they've almost got to do a quarterly pivot, which is a bit nerve-wracking, but they're adapting quite well. And the third here is, I think, instead of shying away from experimentation, let's try, even if it feels a little bit shaky, to stay close to a bit of risk. There are things that we want to be doing now, of course, Maria, to steady the ship. You may for a while just want to steady your supply chain, right? But it doesn't mean you need to kill the experimentation when actually it could have opened up vital new sources of revenue at the time that you really need it. So you can stop always defending your position and create new opportunities just by questioning some of the preconceived notions that you have about people or resource management, and allow others to maybe feed into that. The second is thinking like a futurologist. So as a researcher and futurologist, I have to make informed projections all the time on what will work 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down. And I have to consolidate a number of factors: market forces, new technology, economic conditions, bring them all onto one timeline, and then actually fast track it. So hopefully you can see why leaders themselves would do well to take on this approach to rally growth, because they've got to almost stop and ask the foundational questions. And at a time when you have so many immediate issues in front of you, it may feel a bit challenging to set some time aside for more visionary thinking, but maintaining that longer roadmap, even for a year or 2 years down the line, for your team, for your department, for your company, that critical thinking for the future, the scenario planning remains absolutely vital, and it'll allow you to operate in a more non-linear way during the downturn and actually create the right operational models. And the last, and this is 40 seconds, or listen, 40 seconds, is leadership is everywhere. And to think of this as a collective will do us a lot of good. It's not vested in the board or the raft of executives that only have chief in their title, as much as we must respect their experience. But by virtue of a lot of us being out of action, the crisis is actually spurring those that were not in a pivotal leadership role to step in and assume more of a rallying role of a leader. So actually we're seeing some unsung heroes, middle management or junior management that were previously overlooked, really step up and take the reins for their area or remit. And I think that's very heartening. It means leadership gets a little more to becoming a collective notion, rather than it is just the person that wears the seniority hat.
Thank you for that. That was a really good synopsis of those three areas. So tell me, the third theme which you mentioned, which I think is your own term that you've dubbed emotionally aware innovation. What is that all about?
So the industries within, AI, for example, that rely on AI are a massive chunk. And we've got a global market here set to grow to 200 billion by 2025. This is just artificial intelligence alone. So there's a big commercial opportunity here for those that are thinking this is not what I want to take on for my organization. But also AI has been everywhere for 2 decades. It's been used, for example, in translation software and call centers for decades, even in gaming. It's not new. So I think one thing I want to say up front is we are not currently actually operating at true AI, Maria. We're actually at something called AGI, Artificial Generalized Intelligence. And just to give you an idea of what this is, let me just think of a real life example. So it's a bit funny, actually. If a sat nav is programmed to take you to a meeting that you don't want to be at, but it takes you there as fast as possible, that's AGI, not a great outcome. But this meeting that you so desperately want to avoid, if it gets you there just late enough that you actually miss most of it, that's true AI. Okay, it's working in sync with what the human actually desires, for example, and it's responding in real time. And so within AI, there's a fascinating strand I've been studying for years, absolute geek that I am. And I talk about this at a lot of events, and I call it emotive AI. So what I've advocated for is software that has human cognition. How many of you watching have thought at one point or another, this piece of software doesn't get me? My gosh, this is really frustrating. I feel like I have to be a coder to even work with it. So one thing I'm doing is trying to bridge that gap between man and machine and work more towards computing that can anticipate our needs based on what we tell it, the processes of the human brain. So software that can recognize and simulate our emotion. And Maria, not only that, but it can understand, for example, what I'm saying to it, understand the nuances, the inflections, sarcasm, consciousness, things like that. And actually the answers that the machine then feeds you, for example, a chatbot, are completely with situational context, not the really frustrating conversations we have these days with software or with bots, where you walk away thinking, oh my God, I could have been talking to a wall.
You've been in my kitchen when I've been arguing with Alexa, haven't you? So, so tell me, have you got some examples of organizations that are doing this and doing it well?
Yes. So I think first I'll just give you a couple of use cases. And first of all, to say Microsoft is a great organization that are championing this. Another one is they're called Soul Machines. And I would urge a lot of you to look them up. They're sort of world leading here. And that's SOUL for soul. What these guys are doing essentially is creating a new evolved avatar. You know, I initially left Siri for Alexa. I'm now ditching Alexa for these guys. What this does effectively is put a face to a chatbot. And how they work is you essentially activate them from any device. They could be a tablet, your phone, or your laptop, just something that has a screen. And you can choose to activate your camera so it can see you, or you can choose to activate just audio. You then actually have a back and forth conversation with a face on this avatar that looks human. And it's very clear. They say to you, I'm a digital human, I'm not a real person. But it's shocking how it makes often more sense than a real person. And they're really useful in creating a sort of always on consumer engagement tool. So you could have 500 of these digital human bots available from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. when real workforces and real customer service people are not available as the initial point of contact for your person. So I could essentially, and this often happens to me, 10 o'clock at night, everyone's finally in bed. And I think, oh gosh, I really got to sort this out with my bank or with, for example, my phone provider. Pick up my phone and I think, I can't reach anyone now. I'll try it the next day. It doesn't happen the next day because you're busy. So if at that point I could essentially activate from my banking app, talk to a digital human, that's what I mean. It would come up, it would be a friendly face, it would say it's a bot, and I would actually have a back and forth conversation to say, guys, I'm really rushed, I'm really stressed. I need you to pull up these 3 transactions from last month's bank sheet, and I need you to tell me what I owe to so-and-so, what's my overdraft, and it will actually do that for you. So this is emotionally aware AI, and you are seeing, for example, the New Zealand government is taking this on. 2 banks in the UK are trialing it. It's also, Maria, being used in road safety software and financial planning tools as well.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, so I won't be shouting to my AI in future. So tell me, we're rapidly running out of time. I'm going to ask you one more question before we open it up to other people too. You mentioned myths about digital innovation. Can you bust some myths and stereotypes for us?
Yes, I come up against a lot of stereotypes, and I think as we go into this pandemic summer, it's even more important to debunk them. I think the first is that digital engineering or new technologies don't need policing. In actuality, there is a big need for ethical oversight that we're missing. We've got issues of bias, coercive control, where you use data to monitor someone, legality of ownership of data, autonomous tech, smart city tech, that's tracking people, that's tracking data, and we've got to have a lot more ethical oversight there. The other myth is that all technology is about cold, clinical lines of code. It's only for techies, it's only for the IT team. And it's only the remit of the IT guys or the CTO, but it's not, it's everyone's remit. We've got to make it inclusive. We've got to allow non-techie people in an organization, personal hat on or professional hat on, to be able to get under the hood so you can actually work alongside it. You don't need to be the coder. I'm not a coder, but I get this stuff, so that you can just work with these tools. And lastly, that you need to use it all. You know, when we consider digital innovation and the mix that an organization wants to take on, I often say to them, can I just ask what you don't need? Where to stop, where to start, what to accelerate? Because it's as much about pulling back as it is about suddenly, installing every possible tool from AI to data to blockchain. and keep this inclusive and reframe this whole conversation about innovation to make it boost resiliency and move into public policy, supply chain, legalities, when we're facing some really pressing challenges in all aspects of our recovery timeline.
Super. So thank you, Shivvy. So while we're waiting for John is going to go through and send me some questions from everybody. So anybody, if you want to put a question in the Q&A, please do so. Any final thoughts from you while we gather those?
Absolutely. I think right now we're in a time to relaunch in order to recover. We've got to guide production, supply chain, marketing, recovery timeline. But I think we've also just got to think about our collective responsibility to society as well. Events cannot be preordained. Chaos can be contained a little bit, but we can at least plan for where we want to go. And it's a very complex matrix, Maria, but I think also one where if we can try and use this as an opportunity, as much as we are uncertain, unsettled, frightened, to reimagine a little bit the future of work. How will we get to work? What will it look like when we get there? How will we interact? But wider society, and ultimately take some of the positives that have come from this, the more openness and transparency, and certainly the very kind of called kind leadership. There's a lot of awards now for kind leaders, and I don't think that's a bad thing. So I think using those to drive a sustainable future best as we can.
Super. So I have some questions here. So Barney, I hope I've pronounced this right, has asked tips to include emotive AI in global learning and development programs for companies.
Great, I love that question. So Bhani, Emotive AI, for example, and I've said to you at this point, it's just the digital human, but there are other forms of it, and I wrote this in a piece for Forbes, that effectively are now being built into e-learning software. And I'm very happy to send a couple of suggestions for tools that you can integrate into your own company's intranet, or the learning tools you send out, for example, to your workforce. What they will do is, if the person at the other end is comfortable enabling access to their camera, what this Emotive AI tool does is while the person's going through, for example, this learning module, whether it's about cybersecurity or data analytics, it's actually evaluating from very, very deep computer facial recognition and a few other processes, even to do with intonation and inflection of your voice, how you're actually understanding it, what parts of it are actually completely puzzling to you. And that's, even the slightest furrowing of brows, you can read your micro expression there. Which parts of it delighted you? Which parts of it did you pause at for a longer time than you should have? And actually start to adapt that in real time. So the next module you see and the next module you see is more personalized to your way of learning, because we all learn differently. And I'm very happy to recommend some tools that are doing that beautifully. And again, that they really don't break the bank. A lot of them are more affordable than an update of Microsoft Word. So I think it's very, very clever to actually personalize the experience so that your workforce feel like they're learning based on their way of learning.
Fantastic. I love that. So this question is close to my heart, actually. It says, do you have any views on the future of live events alongside the technology that's coming to the fore? That's from Anonymous, but we'll find out who it is.
That's fine.
It's a great question.
I love your question.
I love the question.
Well, interestingly, I've been trialing over the last 3 months, different types of holographic avatar software. I don't think they work, because what they aim to do is essentially, they're too expensive, and they're meant to replicate a life-size version of me onto your actual, real environment. Someone could project it somewhere. And I think that that's all well and good, but it goes into the uncanny valley just a little bit. So we've got to keep things human-centered and not go too far into gadgets and gizmos. But I think obviously we're using tools like Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp video to quickly connect on video. I'd love to see us use more tools. For example, there's something called Ready Player Zoom, and it's being developed by a great company. I'll include that in my one-pager tip sheet off the back of this. And I just trialed it 2 days ago. What they're doing is actually very quickly building a custom virtual environment into Zoom. So if you imagine, the simpler version of it is you have a beach behind you, okay? But the hyper version of it, the nicer version is it's customized to your office, it's customized to your environment. So an engineering company, for example, recently asked them to customize it to the actual manufacturing plant. And then another one, which I really love, is interposes me into a very contextual environment to do with the future. And it just brings it to life. It allows people to immerse and engage a bit more. Maria, you know better than I do about keeping people engaged, because you do amazing podcasts and leadership training. So I think tools like that will be a massive help.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to immersing myself into some weird world. Ready, steady, zoom. So, last question. So what are the top 3 tech developments that people can look forward to changing their lives in the next few years? And that's from Cheryl Evans.
Great. So Cheryl, I'll maybe do this as, I'll take it out of the enterprise context. So let's just talk about something that actually just helps how we live, work, and play. I think the first is with health technologies. You've now got software and tools that can essentially be embedded into your phones that are becoming available that can, for example, detect early stage skin cancer, that can detect problems with eyesight, in fact, in some cases with 85% more accuracy than an actual person. And you've got, for example, this being used in hospitals as well, where it can monitor the patient's vital signs in real time, not relying on human error. So if you imagine that you've got a doctor and the nurses constantly in manic shifts, and if you think that the future of your parent or your sibling or your child, God forbid, is in their hands, it's actually quite nerve-wracking. So I like the fact that this takes the guesswork out of it. It's monitoring your vitals every single moment. And as soon as it flags there are abnormalities or warning signs, it sends an alert to the doctor's phone or to the nurse's station. And I've seen that in real time used in 3 hospitals in London. That's something I think now the health is becoming so big for us that will be on our radar to help us stay safer longer. I think the other one is actually hybrid data. So we all think of data analytics as these boring models of Excel spreadsheets. And I shouldn't say this because my husband uses boring models of Excel spreadsheets. He has 5 of them open every day. But these tools are going to be much more people friendly. So one of the things that they'll do is something called an IQ bot. I'd urge you to look it up. It's a company called Automation Anywhere. I have no commercial connection to any of the people I've mentioned today. And they're called IQ bot. What it does is you install it and it simply observes how you as a person, Cheryl, are actually using certain tools. What pieces of information are you deeming important? What are you categorizing as this sort of expense? Which piece of copy are you, feeling as this is the right job description if you're in an HR function? So it's learning from how you work, what you deem important. And then after a week or 2, it does it by itself, comes to you for a bit of correction and sentiment check, and then can actually automate a lot of that on its own, saving up to 1 day's manpower per week, which is fantastic. And I've trialed this and it's been a massive help. And I think the last one would really be, in this kind of turbulent time, actually, we mustn't forget about mental well-being, both in the workplace and offline as well, when we're juggling families, work, and life. And one area of technology that's seeing a massive surge is actually well-being apps and tools to keep, monitor, and detect stress. So you've got little gadgets where you hold your finger down on it and it detects electrodermal activity of your fingertips, tells you how stressed you are in real time or when you're in a meeting with a particular person. But, in a more simple way, you've got apps that will allow you to center yourself a bit better. And in that way, you're much more productive at work as well. So I think not forgetting all the components of how we live, work, and play and stay connected with each other will hopefully help us through this crisis.
Okay, super. So I've just had a note from admin to say it was actually Yasmin Broadbent who asked that excellent question. And I've written down IQ bot. I'm going to investigate that.
Yeah,
so Shivvy, we could talk all day, which we've done in the past, but you've given us a lot to think about today.
Great,
You mentioned you're going to create a 1-pager. So let me tell everybody how they can get hold of that, because I think that's going to be a very valuable 1-pager summarizing the takeaways from this. If you could email webinars@londonspeakerbureau.com, that's webinars@londonspeakerbureau.com, and maybe my assistant, my able colleague could put that in the chat so everybody can make a note, and in the subject put Shivvy, and we'll know what that's about then, won't we, so that we can get the 1-pager. Shivvy, thank you so much.
More than welcome. My absolute pleasure. Thank you all for watching. Great.
Thanks everyone for joining again. As you can see, next week, Maria will again be speaking, this time with Bo Lotto. The address I'll just kind of quickly put in the chat, as we said, is webinars@londonspeakerbureau.com. And if you have any queries, please do feel free to reach out to us, and have a great end of the week. Take care.